Nero Wolfe and the widow who hid behind the curtain. It was one of those New York afternoons where the city couldn't decide whether to be crisp or clammy. The sidewalks steamed from the morning rain, the sun kept ducking behind clouds like a cheap magician, and the air couldn't make up its mind about letting you breathe it or choke on it. Inside the brownstone, of course, life was ruled by more reliable forces. The orchids upstairs on their strict schedule, the kitchen below run like a temple by Fritz, and Nero Wolfe himself squarely planted in his chair behind the big mahogany desk, like a sovereign who had long ago given up the pretense of needing an army. I was halfway through a piece in the Gazette about a city councilman's expense scandal, nothing surprising but the details made for good comedy, when the doorbell rang. It wasn't the polite sort of ring that suggests delivery boy with a package or neighbor in need of sugar. No, this was a long, anxious press that sent the chime echoing into Wolfe's sanctuary. "Archie," Wolfe grumbled without opening his eyes. He had been pretending to skim through a monograph on some obscure variety of Moldavian herbs, though if you ask me, the eyelids had been doing most of the work. "Yeah, I heard it," I said, getting up. "Could be the councilman, coming here to confess and beg absolution." Pfui. Wolfe didn't stir. When I opened the door, the councilman theory went out the window. Standing there was a woman in a black dress, not quite widow's weeds, but close enough for a casting director to nod approval. She was in her 50s, with the kind of eyes that looked like they'd been trained to keep secrets longer than most people keep friends. She held a handbag tight against her chest as if she was afraid the air might snatch it from her. "Is this the residence of Mr. Nero Wolfe?" she asked, her voice low, with that tremor people get when they're trying not to let a tremor show. "It is," I said, "and the offices too, if you have business. Won't you come in?" She stepped past me like someone entering a confessional. As soon as the door closed behind her, I got the impression she'd left something unpleasant on the stoop. Trouble, maybe. I showed her into the office. Wolfe didn't look up until I cleared my throat. "Mrs. Lydia Vance," she introduced herself after I pulled up a chair for her. "I was told, by a man I barely trust, that you are the only one who can help me." Wolfe made a sound that was neither yes nor no, just a polite grunt that could be translated later depending on how things unfolded. "Help you with what, madam?" he asked, his lips barely parting. She glanced at me, then back at Wolfe. "With protecting my husband's name. He is dead, and someone is trying to drag him through the mud with lies." That got Wolfe's eyebrows to twitch, which in our line of work counted as a standing ovation. He shifted a little in his chair. I leaned back, watching her. Widows come in varieties. The grief-stricken, the relieved, the opportunistic, and the suspicious. Mrs. Vance didn't fit any box neatly, which made her worth listening to. "What form do these lies take?" Wolfe asked. "A manuscript," she said. "My husband's colleague wrote it. A memoir, he calls it. In it are insinuations, disgraceful ones, that my husband cheated, betrayed, even worse." She stopped, clutching that handbag like it might leak poison if she loosened her grip. I asked, "And you want Wolfe to play book critic?" "No." Her eyes hardened. "I want him to stop the book, to find out why it was written and what the man hopes to gain. And I want my husband's name cleared before it is too late." Wolfe finally sat up straighter and gave her the full weight of his gaze. He hadn't agreed, and he hadn't refused, but I knew that look. Something in the widow's words had prodded his curiosity or his conscience. And that was the moment I realized our quiet afternoon had just been rearranged. Wolfe let the silence sit there, heavy as a stone on velvet. He has a way of doing that, of making you wonder whether he's thinking, digesting, or just enjoying the discomfort of the other party. Mrs. Vance folded her gloved hands over the handbag on her lap and tried to wait him out, but her foot betrayed her, tapping against the rug in small nervous spasms. I've seen hardened district attorneys fold under Wolfe's brand of inaction. She was no DA. Finally, Wolfe spoke. "Madam, posthumous reputations are delicate things. They are vulnerable to many intrusions, some of them true, most of them fanciful. The dead, alas, do not defend themselves. Why then should I?" Her chin came up sharply. "Because what this man has written is not fanciful, it is malicious. He claims my husband embezzled funds from the foundation he served. He claims he carried on with a woman who—" She stopped, either deciding Wolfe didn't need the sordid detail or because her throat closed on her. "And he suggests that my husband's death was not natural. All of it lies," I piped in. "What foundation?" She turned to me, a little startled, as though she had forgotten I existed. "The Vance Foundation for Historical Preservation. My husband, Edward, founded it 25 years ago. He devoted his life to it. The idea that he—" Her face contorted, and she shook her head sharply, cutting it off. "It is outrageous. It would ruin everything he built, his legacy. My legacy." Wolfe exhaled through his nose, a sound like a very soft snort. "Legacies, Mrs. Vance, are the obsession of those who fear oblivion. If this memoir is as injurious as you claim, legal recourse is available. Hire an attorney, seek an injunction, threaten litigation." "I have." The words came quick, clipped. "They tell me it cannot be stopped. That memoirs, however distasteful, are protected unless proven libelous. They say we would have to wait until after publication and then sue. That would take years, Mr. Wolfe. By then the damage would be done. The book will be read, reviewed, repeated. The stain will spread." I was watching her face closely. Her cheeks flushed as she spoke, and her eyes darted to the curtains, the shelves, anywhere but Wolfe's steady gaze. I've played poker with some tough hombres, and I can usually tell when someone's bluffing. This woman wasn't bluffing, but she was hiding something. Wolfe tapped a finger on the armrest of his chair. "And the colleague who penned this assault?" "Professor Alan Redmayne. He was Edward's closest associate for years, decades. They worked together on the Foundation's earliest projects. Then, a quarrel. They parted ways. Edward said little about it, only that Redmayne had ambitions he could not indulge. That was 15 years ago. Now the man resurfaces with this vile manuscript." That little foot resumed its nervous tapping. I said, "If they split that long ago, why is Redmayne suddenly resurrecting his grievances?" She turned to me with sudden fierceness. "Because Edward is dead, because the one man who could refute him is gone, and because Redmayne knows the Foundation is vulnerable without its founder." She clutched the handbag tighter, her knuckles whitening. "He means to discredit Edward so thoroughly that he can seize control. He has followers, supporters. They whisper already. That is why I came here. I cannot, must not, allow it." Wolfe shut his eyes again. "If you didn't know him, you might think he was nodding off, but I knew better. He was fitting the puzzle pieces, deciding whether the game was worth the candle. You expect me," he said at last, "to prevent publication of a book. That is outside my province. I neither litigate nor censor." "You can expose him," she said quickly. "Unmask his motives. Show the world he is lying before the book sees print. If you can do that, the publisher will withdraw. They will not risk scandal if the author himself is discredited." Her voice broke there, and I thought for a moment she'd lost her balance entirely. But she drew a breath, sat up straighter, and pushed through. "I've nowhere else to turn. They say you are a man who sees through people, who cannot be deceived. Please, Mr. Wolfe, do this for Edward, for me." The office was quiet again, except for the faint rumble of traffic from West 35th Street outside. I knew Wolfe well enough to see the wheels moving under the surface. He loathes meddling in petty vendettas. But when a case presents itself as a question of truth, of intellectual fraud, he cannot quite ignore it. And Mrs. Vance, whether she knew it or not, had placed the bait squarely in front of him. He opened his eyes, studied her face, then closed them once more. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Telephone Mr. Redmayne. Request his attendance here this evening, if he is willing." I raised my eyebrows. "You mean you're actually interested?" He didn't answer me. Instead, he turned his head slightly toward Mrs. Vance. "Madam, I will speak to this man. If his intentions are malicious, I will discern it. Whether I proceed beyond that depends." She sagged in her chair like a puppet with cut strings, relief mixed with fatigue. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. You don't know what this means." I wasn't so sure about that. I walked her to the door, and as she left, I caught a faint scent of lavender trailing her, sharp against the damp New York air. She descended the steps quickly, her black dress fluttering like she feared the world outside might swallow her whole. Back in the office, Wolfe had shifted in his chair, the book on herbs now abandoned. His lips were pursed, which is his version of whistling a tune. "Archie," he said, "observe her closely when she returns. She is withholding something." "You don't say." I sank back into my chair. "I'd have bet a week's salary on it. The question is what?" She was plenty worked up, but not just about the book. Something else had her spooked. Wolfe opened his eyes again, and they were sharp now, gleaming under the heavy lids. "Yes, and we shall discover what. Call Redmayne. Persuade him that it is in his interest to come. Use what inducements you must." Which, translated, meant charm, bluff, or bully as necessary. Wolfe himself would never beg anyone for anything, but he had no compunction about letting me do the heavy lifting. I went to the phone and flipped open the directory. A name like Alan Redmayne isn't exactly hiding among the Smiths and Joneses. It didn't take long to find his number. He answered on the second ring, a voice deep and gravelly, with a rasp that suggested too many cigars or too much shouting at graduate students. When I identified myself and said I spoke for Nero Wolfe, he barked a laugh. "Nero Wolfe, the detective. What the devil does he want with me?" "Just a chat," I said smoothly. "About your forthcoming literary masterpiece." That got him quiet for a second. Then, suspicion creeping in. "Who put you up to this?" "Lydia." "She's running scared, is she?" "Mr. Redmayne," I said, letting my tone cool down. "If you have nothing to fear, then a polite conversation can't hurt. Wolfe would be obliged if you came by this evening. Say 8 o'clock. He gave another short bark, but it wasn't laughter this time. "Obliged? Huh. I've nothing to hide. I'll come. But I warn you, young man, if this is some scheme of hers, you'll have your chance to say so. 8 o'clock sharp." I hung up before he could work up a full head of steam. Wolfe had been listening, eyes closed, nodding at intervals. "He'll come," I said. "Good." Wolfe settled deeper into the chair though that one syllable had cost him dearly. "Archie, there will be others. The widow, the professor, and more behind them. This is not merely about a book. It is about power. We must be prepared." I knew that tone. It meant our quiet brownstone had just been drafted into someone else's war. And if Wolfe was sharpening his mind for battle, it meant the rest of us, me, Fritz, and the orchids, were in for some turbulence. Sure enough, at 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Saul Panzer, hat in hand, expression unreadable. Wolfe had sent for him, though he hadn't mentioned it to me. And if Wolfe was bringing Saul in before the first suspect had even set foot in the office, it meant one thing only. The brownstone was already disturbed, and the game had truly begun. Saul didn't bother with small talk. He eyed Wolfe, then me, and set his hat on the edge of the red leather chair like a well-trained terrier. Wolfe inclined his head, which for Saul is a whole briefing. I gave him the short version of The Widow, the memoir, and our 8 o'clock rendezvous with the professor. Saul's eyes didn't travel much, but they registered what they needed and filed it. Wolfe said, We shall be visited at 8 by Professor Alan Redmayne. Meanwhile, Archie, assemble a circle. Names, positions, and the trajectories of their appetites. The foundation is a hive. We must chart the vectors of its bees. Saul said, "You want me on the professor or the hive?" "Both," Wolfe murmured. "But first, watch the approach to this house. I dislike interlopers." Saul slid out without sound. The brownstone breathed again. If you don't know Saul Panzer, imagine a chess piece that can move like a knight and a bishop at the same time, never knocking anything over. I went for the phone and started in on the Vance Foundation directory. Someone had arranged their public listing with the confidence of people who believe sunlight only ever tans. "Vance Foundation," a woman answered, crisp as a fresh bill. "This is Marta Kellogg." That saved me a step. "Archie Goodwin for Nero Wolfe, Miss Kellogg. We're looking into chatter concerning Professor Redmayne's memoir. We'll need to speak with you at your earliest convenience." "Mr. Wolfe," she said, and the temperature of the line dropped 3 degrees. "I've heard of him. If you are retained by Mrs. Vance, please tell her to stop treating the foundation like a family heirloom. We're a public trust." "That suggests you're less than charmed by the widow. When can we talk?" "Tomorrow," she said, too quick. "I'm in Queens tonight for a fundraiser." "Your title?" "Executive Director." "And your opinion of Redmayne?" She paused. "Irrelevant. I don't dignify gossip. Send me questions by email." She hung up before I could offer to send flowers instead. Executive directors collect silence the way some people collect stamps. I dialed again. "Finance," a man said, flat and nasal. "Thomas Brigham." "Yes, who's this?" "Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe." Another pause, this one sticky. "Mrs. Vance is wasting donor funds hiring detectives." "That depends on what there is to detect. Embezzlement, for instance." His breath snagged. "Redmayne's lies aren't worth refuting." "Then refute one for me. Is there a hole in the books?" "Absolutely not. Our audits are clean." "Good. Then you won't mind dropping by tomorrow with a copy." "I will not," he said, and did. If I had a nickel for every time someone stonewalled and then tripped over his own hesitation, Wolfe could buy a ranch and ruin it by never setting foot outside. Next call. "Archives?" The voice belonged to a woman, low and smoky like she'd been practicing for a microphone. "Delia Shaw speaking." "Ms. Shaw, Archie Goodwin. If I say Alan Redmayne, do you say bless him or hang him?" She laughed, not happily. "I say he's a moth-eaten lion who thinks he's still king." "Why?" "Because he's accusing your late employer of things that would curl an archivist's hair." "My hair doesn't curl," she said, "and Mr. Vance didn't need my defense when he was alive. He certainly doesn't need it from me now." That non-answer deserved a ribbon. "Did Redmayne ever visit your stacks recently?" "Not without an escort. The histrionics are tired, Mr. Goodwin. If Mrs. Vance wants a choir, I'm not singing." She hung up, and I put her in the column marked, "Doesn't need a microphone." She already has one. I tried one more name from a board list. Harlan Spade, the board chair. He answered from somewhere that echoed. "Spade. Goodwin for Wolfe." "Lawyers first, detectives second," he said. "That's my motto." "Cute motto. Professor Redmayne. Friend or famine?" "Old history. Today's work is keeping the foundation solvent, not refereeing dead men's feuds." "You're close with Mrs. Vance?" "As close as is wise. I respected her husband." "Enough to keep quiet if the book is true?" He snorted. "If you want truth, buy it retail. I'm busy." The echo swallowed him whole. When I looked up, Fritz was in the doorway, polite disturbance in person. "Mr. Goodwin," he said. "Someone delivered an envelope for Mr. Wolfe. There was no name, only a knock and feet already running." He held it like a waiter presenting something that might explode. I took it to Wolfe, who had his eyes at a half-mast, which means fully open. Inside the manila, just one photocopied page, block letters in a neat black felt tip. Ask her about the curtain. Then a second line in smaller print. Page 213. Pui, Wolfe said mildly. Crude bait. Which her? I asked. Mrs. Vance. Delia Shaw? Marta? Do not be stupid, Archie, he said, which meant he was being careful not to commit himself. Page 213 of what? The memoir, I'd guess. Good. Then our professor will be helpful if he is vain. He let the page rest on his blotter like a dead fish. Curtain? Maybe literal, maybe theatrical. I thought of Mrs. Vance's glance at our office drapes. Maybe both. At 6:38, Saul materialized again. Street's quiet, he said. No watchers. I canvassed the block. One courier on a bike stopped 10 minutes ago, delivered to you, then zipped east. We received it, Wolfe said. He flicked a finger at the page. Saul read it and didn't blink. Should I tail Redmayne after tonight? Saul asked. Yes, Wolfe said. If he leaves here with a destination other than home. If he goes home, verify he enters and stays. If he detours, observe. Wolfe closed his eyes, then opened them. You have a car? Saul inclined his head. That means yes, and it runs. The phone rang again. I took it. A woman with a brisk tone announced herself as Celia Brand, Legal Affairs at Hart and Burroughs, the publisher of Redmayne's book. She had the smile of a person who can write a cease and desist letter in her sleep. Mr. Goodwin, we understand Mr. Wolfe has been engaged by an interested party. We intend no quarrel with the deceased's reputation, but our author stands by his work. I'm touched by your concern, I said. We're having a friendly chat with him at 8. I'm sure it will be civil, she said, only half meaning it. For everyone's peace, please record the conversation. We prefer our peace unrecorded, I told her, and after a brief pause heavy with subtext, she rang off. I relayed it. Wolfe made a face like he'd bit a lemon seed. Be alert to artifice, he said. Publishers are as timid as field mice and as treacherous as cats. He consulted his watch, which is to say he didn't, because he hates wearing one. Archie, Mrs. Vance will return. Have Fritz keep the dining room off limits. Because of a curtain? I asked. Because the office suffices. At 7, the doorbell went again. I took it. A man stood on the top step in a coat too heavy for the weather and a tie knotted like an apology. He was 30, maybe, with a student's face that had misplaced its innocence. I'm Owen Harcourt, he said quickly. I was Redmayne's assistant. I need to talk to Mr. Wolfe. I brought him in. Harcourt's hands twitched like nervous birds. When Wolfe looked at him, the twitching slowed. You've chosen an inconvenient time, Mr. Harcourt, Wolfe said. I know, I'm sorry. Professor Redmayne, if he's coming here, he'll say terrible things. He'll say Mrs. Vance. He stopped, swallowing hard. Please, he's exaggerating. He's wrong. About what? I asked. About Mr. Vance's death, and about the curtain. It was a misunderstanding. Which curtain? Wolfe asked softly. The one in the Foundation's reading room, he said, and his eyes begged us to keep it secret. There's a sensor behind it. It flags when someone opens the emergency exit. It went off the night Mr. Vance died, and Professor Redmayne thinks... Finish it, I said. He thinks Mrs. Vance left with someone, that she staged... He collapsed into silence. Wolfe's lids lowered. Why come now? Because I thought he wouldn't tell that part. But he will. I heard him on the phone with his editor. He's furious that you called. He's going to use everything. That suggests, Wolfe said, that Mr. Redmayne values sensation over scruple. Archie. Yeah? Obtain from Mr. Harcourt the names of the staff on duty the night in question and the time the censor was tripped. Wolfe paused. Also, inquire whether Mr. Harcourt has stolen any documents." Harcourt jerked. "I didn't steal. I made a copy of a log. I thought if he twisted it, I could show—" He reached into his coat and produced a folded sheet. I took it. It listed times, initials, and a scrawl at 9:47 p.m. "Curtain sensor, active. Reset, 9:52, DS." "Delia Shaw," I said. Harcourt nodded miserably. "She reset it. She told me to forget it." "And you didn't," Wolfe said. "I couldn't." He looked up at us like a dim dog who had nonetheless fetched the right stick. "Please don't tell him I came." "I promise nothing," Wolfe said, which is his version of mercy. At 7:55, Harcourt slipped out by the side door, Saul shadowing him from the stoop like a lengthening shadow. Fritz appeared with coffee. Wolfe didn't drink it. He sat very still, his head at a slight tilt, listening to the brownstone like it might whisper the rest into his ear. At 7:59, the bell pealed, and the echo moved through the house with a soprano's assurance. I straightened my tie. "The lion," I told Wolfe, "approaches his arena." "Let him roar," Wolfe said. "He has already told me what he is." Redmayne was a big man, though not in Wolfe's proportions. He carried himself with the kind of assurance that comes from years of lecturing to captive audiences. The coat came off to reveal a houndstooth jacket stretched just slightly too tight at the buttons, and his eyes swept the office with contempt before they settled on Wolfe. He didn't glance at me. I wasn't the quarry he'd come for. "So," he said, voice booming enough to test the windows, "the great Nero Wolfe stoops to intervene in the affairs of scholars. I must confess, I'm disappointed. I thought your reputation was for higher game than widow's wails." Wolfe didn't shift an inch, but his tone carried weight. "Professor Redmayne, it is customary in my office to be seated when one speaks." For a moment, Redmayne considered whether to defy the suggestion, then relented and lowered himself into the chair opposite Wolfe. The houndstooth complained softly. "You've written a memoir," Wolfe said. "I have written the truth," Redmayne corrected. "And truth, Mr. Wolfe, needs no detective's blessing." I said, truth apparently needing a few flourishes, judging by the chapter titles. That got me his first glance. "Goodwin, is it? I know of you, the faithful errand boy. Fetch the bones while your master chews them." I smiled sweetly. "If I fetch bones, Professor, it's only because people like you leave them scattered around." Wolfe raised a hand, cutting through the sparring. "Professor, Mrs. Vance contends your book is malicious fabrication, written not to illuminate, but to defame." Redmayne leaned forward, hands gripping the chair arms. "Lydia Vance fears daylight, that is all. Edward was no saint. He misused funds, betrayed her with women, and on the night of his death, yes, his death, there were circumstances." "What circumstances?" Wolfe asked evenly. "The curtain in the Foundation's reading room. He had a liaison there. Lydia discovered it, raged at him, and hours later he was dead. Heart attack, they said. Convenient, wasn't it?" I watched him closely. He was pushing the story hard, as though the more volume he used, the more credible it became. But his eyes didn't quite meet Wolfe's. They slid away at critical moments. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Your account, sir, differs from others I've heard. A sensor behind that curtain was triggered that night. Reset by a staff member. You omit that." That knocked him half an inch back. He recovered with a scowl. "Who told you that?" "Facts are not jealous of their messengers," Wolfe replied. "Why do you insist on Lydia Vance's involvement?" Redmayne hesitated. Only a flicker, but it was there. "Because I know her. Because she has always craved control. The Foundation, the funds, her husband's reputation. She cannot abide anyone else wielding influence. When Edward defied her, when he took lovers, when he questioned her use of money," she snapped. "If she did not strike him down, then she at least rejoiced at the end of his tyranny." That was a speech rehearsed for print, I thought. Every word polished for scandal. I said, "You've got one problem, Professor. You weren't there. You don't know what happened behind that curtain. You've got fragments, and you've stretched them like rubber bands. You keep pulling, and one's going to snap." He sneered. "I've got documents, logs, witnesses. And if Nero Wolfe is as clever as his press clippings suggest, he'll see that the widow is hiding behind those curtains still." "Pfui," Wolfe muttered. "Professor, you have dressed conjecture as evidence and envy as indignation. Whatever your grievance with the widow, you are playing it out upon her husband's grave." Redmayne's colour rose. "Grievance? She shut me out. Me, who built that foundation alongside Edward. I was there before she was more than a decorative ornament at board dinners. When she arrived, suddenly I was an intruder in my own house. Do you know what that feels like, Wolfe? To be written out of your own history?" That, at least, rang genuine. Wolfe's lids drooped. "You desire revenge dressed as justice, dangerous attire. Archie, you will escort Professor Redmayne out." Redmayne shot to his feet. "You can sneer, Wolfe, but the book is already typeset. Nothing you do will stop it. The world will know the truth." "The world," Wolfe said softly, "may prefer truth uncloaked of spite. Good evening." I ushered him out before he could add another aria. At the door, he turned to me with sudden venom. "Tell your master this. When the curtain falls, it falls on everyone, even him." He clomped down the steps, coat flapping, and vanished into the night. When I got back, Wolfe was still as a statue. "Saul will follow him," he said without opening his eyes. "He'll have fun," I said. "The professor's subtle as a marching band." "Subtlety is not requisite. Persistence is." He opened his eyes finally, fixing me. "Archie, tomorrow you will visit the foundation. Speak with Miss Shaw. She reset the censor. I want to know why." "You think she's covering for Lydia?" "Possibly. Or for herself. People conceal not only crimes but embarrassments. The curtain is a veil, Archie, behind which stands motive." I let that one hang. Wolfe never wastes a metaphor without a reason. The house was quiet again. Fritz tiptoed in with a plate of sandwiches, which Wolfe ignored. I took one because Fritz takes it personally when food goes untouched. At 9:30, the phone rang. Wolfe nodded, and I answered. It was Mrs. Vance. Her voice was sharp with fear. "Mr. Goodwin, please, has he been there? Has he—" "Yes, he's been. He said his piece." "What did he tell you?" "That your husband was faithless, that you were furious, that the curtain hides scandal." A low moan leaked from her throat. "Lies, all lies. You must believe me." "That's Wolfe's department. Mine's getting the facts. So let me ask, the night your husband died, where were you between 9 and 10? Her breath hitched. I was in the reading room, yes, but only to collect papers. Edward had been working there. I never saw any woman. When the alarm buzzed, Delia, Miss Shaw, came and silenced it. She said it was a draft, the curtain brushing the censor. You didn't wonder why an emergency exit sensor went off. I trusted her. I didn't think. And then later, Edward collapsed. The doctor said it was his heart. He'd been warned for years. She was unraveling, but not entirely. There was a core of steel under the fear. "Mr. Goodwin," she said urgently, "you must not let him destroy. Edward, whatever you believe about me, he must not win." She hung up before I could ask the question itching on my tongue. What did she fear more, Edward's reputation in ruins, or Redmayne succeeding where she had failed? I relayed it all to Wolfe. He listened, eyes closed, then finally sighed. "Tomorrow, Archie. Shaw first, then Brigham and Kellogg. The foundation is a web. Tug at one strand, and the spider scurries." "Which spider?" I asked. "That," he said, "is what we shall determine." The rest of the night passed without further disturbance. But as I climbed the stairs later, I couldn't shake the image of that heavy curtain in some dim reading room, concealing who knew what. Wolfe would sit in his chair and strip the fabric thread by thread. My job, as usual, was to find out who had been standing behind it when it moved. Morning brought a sky the color of yesterday's coffee and the kind of wind that makes a necktie feel like a leash. Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids from 9 to 11, as immutable as sunrise, so breakfast was a peaceful affair until Fritz put a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me and sighed like a church organ losing air. I asked him what grave misfortune had befallen the kitchen. He pinched his lips. Nothing. Only some person rearranged the copper ladles by size instead of by handle weight. It is not sensible. In a house where a misfiled ladle qualified as a disturbance, you learn not to laugh. I promised justice for the ladles and took off for the foundation. The Vance Foundation occupied a limestone relic on a block that smelled of dry paper and expensive optimism. Inside, the lobby had the hush of a library, pretending not to judge you. A receptionist asked my business with the alert chill of a person trained to identify donors by cologne. I told her Archie Goodwin for Nero Wolfe and asked for Delia Shaw. She put a finger to her headset and, a minute later, waved me toward the reading room. The room itself had the long, tired elegance of public institutions. Oak tables, green-shaded lamps, and a drape at the far end that could have clothed a small army. The curtain guarded a narrow door with a brass push bar, an emergency exit for patrons who liked their emergencies theatrical. The censor was a dull metal lozenge tucked behind the fold, winking a red dot like a guilty conscience. Delia Shaw materialized out of the stacks with a pencil behind her ear and a gaze that had filed men into categories and lost patience with all of them. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "you want to see me about alarms and drapery." "I do," I said. "I'm partial to both." The night Mr. Vance died, the sensor tripped at 9:47 and you reset at 9:52. "Why?" "Because it went off," she said, "and someone had to stop it. If that's what they taught you in archival school, I want my tuition back. Sensors don't trip themselves." "They do in the HVAC. Wheezes," she said, deadpan. "That door sticks. It's a 19th century door with 20th century hardware and 21st century ductwork. It sulks. The curtain catches air, the bar quivers, the sensor blinks. I silence it and log it. It was routine. Routine enough that you initialed it like a dentist signing a confession. I held up the copy Harcourt had slipped us mentally. Not physically. DS. Deliberate and neat. She peered at me. "You've seen the log." "I've seen a line," I said. "What sent you there so fast?" "I was on the floor," she said. "I live here, Mr. Goodwin. Ask the carpet. It knows my shoes." "Were you alone when you silenced it?" "I was with the curtain. We're intimate." There was a curl at the edge of her mouth now, not quite a smile, more a reflex. If you're asking whether I found two lovers tangled behind it, the answer is dull. Dull answers can be useful. Did you tell Mrs. Vance it was a draft? "I told her it wasn't a fire," Delia said. "She looked like she needed oxygen herself, not panic. She'd come to fetch papers. She left with nothing as far as I saw." "Professor Redmayne says the censor means flesh and scandal." "Professor Redmayne says a lot," she said. "He's a monarch without a country who thinks memoir is invasion. He's mistaken." "About the alarm?" I asked. "About everything that isn't him," she said, and turned toward the stacks. I followed. "You want to know what Edward Vance was that night?" she went on. "He was tired. He had been for months. He loved his wife. He loved the foundation like a first child that never disobeyed him. He did not love the march of time." "Time does have lousy rhythm," I said. "Tell me about your reset procedure." She gave me a look that would have alphabetized a lesser man. "Really?" "Really," she described it. Key panel on the wall behind the curtain. Code entered, chime silenced, log note made. She had done it a dozen times in a year. I asked whether anyone else knew the code. She said facilities and the executive director, Marta Kellogg. Finance is not allowed near buttons, she added, which brought Brigham into the conversation without his consent. I should see Marta, I said. I'll walk you, she offered, and the way she said it made me think this was insurance against letting me wander. Marta Kellogg's office had the tidy menace of a dentist's tray. She sat behind a glass desk, all angles and calm, with a silver pen laid perfectly perpendicular to a legal pad. She didn't offer a chair. I took one anyway. Mr. Goodwin, she said, I have 5 minutes. The 6th is a donor. I'll spend 4, I told her. Your emergency door sensor misbehaved the night Mr. Vance died. It coughed, she said. Delia smacked it. It's on the maintenance list. I signed the ticket. If you're hoping the curtain hides adultery, you're reading the wrong century. Then Professor Redmayne's century is older than I thought, I said. He also says the foundation accounts sprout holes under moonlight. Your finance man assures me they don't. Brigham assures everyone. It's his principal function. She tapped the pen once. Our audits are clean. Anyone who says otherwise misunderstands restricted gifts and cash flow. You could show me those audits and remove misunderstandings. I could, she said. And yet. The pen didn't move again. Then tell me why page 213 matters. That made both of her eyebrows do a quick foxtrot. Page 213 of what? Of the professor's book, I said, and watched her eyes. She kept them on mine. No idea, she said too easily. We haven't seen galleys. Our counsel has, perhaps. Ask Harlan Spade. He knows everything and tells nothing. Delia, who had drifted to the doorway and pretended to be interested in a framed certificate, didn't twitch at the number. Either the page meant nothing, or she kept her twitching for privacy. I let Marta get back to her donor and went hunting Brigham. Finance lived in a room where the air smelled of toner and resignation. Brigham was the sort of man who hoards paper clips. He glanced at my card like it might overdraw him. You again, he said. Still me, I said. Your audits. We don't pass around audits like pastries. He squared a stack of reports. Mrs. Vance has already done enough damage with her emotions. She doesn't need a detective feeding at the same trough. Save the farm talk, I told him. Did Mr. Vance ever question your work? Brigham's jaw flexed. He questioned everything. It's how he built this place. He signed every check over 10,000, and he initialed the ledger by habit. If he'd seen a problem, he would have broken my fingers with a handshake. Then why is Redmayne yelling embezzlement? Because shouting is cheaper than math. I left him to his arithmetic and took a slow stroll back through the reading room. I stood with the curtain and let it breathe on me. A gentle tug of air moved it just enough to whisper against the bar. If the censor was finicky, I could believe it blinked at ghosts. Still, there was an intimacy to the space, a stage within the hall. If someone wanted privacy, it promised a little. Outside, the wind had picked up and was bullying hats into gutters. I cut back to the brownstone, brought the city with me in damp shoes, and found Wolfe already in the office. He had returned from the orchids and was granting Fritz the privilege of reciting lunch. Fritz departed, mollified. Wolfe extended a finger. Report. I gave it to him flat. Delia's routine reset, Marta's pen perpendicular to refusal, Brigham's math. If the censor kissed the air, nothing more, I concluded. If it kissed a person, Delia's not telling. And Mrs. Vance? He asked. She says she fetched papers and no lovers, I said. She didn't like the alarm. She liked it less after Redmayne spun it into melodrama. Wolfe closed his eyes. Saul telephoned. Our professor left here to meet a woman, Celia Brand of the publisher, at a bar on 58th. They quarreled moderately. He then mailed a thick envelope at a postal kiosk and went home. Galleys to council, I suggested. Perhaps. or bait. He opened his eyes. The note. It was still where he'd left it last night, tucked beneath the corner of his blotter. I slid it out and felt a prickle run up my neck before my eyes told me why. The neat block letters were the same. The message was the same. Ask her about the curtain, but the second line, which had read page 213, now read page 231. I didn't say anything for 3 seconds, which was a personal best. Wolfe's face didn't change, but the air around him did. He lifted the paper and held it to the light, then to his nostrils. Ink smell is faint. The alteration is in the numerals only. Someone was in here, I said, while you were with the orchids and I was out. Fritz? Fritz does not exchange digits on anonymous notes, Wolfe said quietly. He pressed the edge of the paper, thoughtful. The brownstone has been trespassed. He spoke the last word like it had a rind he intended to peel. I went to the hallway and checked the front door chain. Fastened. The latch on the windows, secure. The back door, locked according to Fritz, who met me with affronted eyebrows. He swore no one had come, neither messenger nor ghost. The phone had been still. The house had been a cathedral. Back in the office, Wolfe was as composed as a carved idol. A triviality, he said, which meant he considered it a declaration of war. A meddler who believes himself clever and wishes to send us to the wrong shelf. Maybe the right shelf moved, I said. Maybe the book's page changed in a new draft. Perhaps. He laid the altered page beside the memory of the old. We shall use the medal as a lever. How? You will telephone Miss Shaw, he said. Tell her that the note we received indicated page 231. See if she corrects you. If she doesn't, telephone Mrs. Vance and mention 231 in passing. Then call the executive director and listen for the flinch. And if none of them twitch, then the interloper is not within that triad, Wolfe said, and we consider other candidates. The professor, his assistant, the publisher's counsel, or an unknown who enjoys our air. Fritz knocked and asked if he should plate lunch. Wolfe said no. Fritz took it as a meteorological anomaly and withdrew, leaving the scent of tarragon in his wake. Wolfe closed his eyes and put both hands flat on the desk, palms anchoring the wood as if it might try to drift. I watched the curtain of our own window stir in a draught too small to name and thought of the other curtain across town, hiding either wind or sin, and of a hand, whose, that had stood in this room and switched 2 numbers as if they were chessmen. Begin with Delia, Wolfe said without opening his eyes. If she reaches to correct you, we will know which shelf the book is on. I dialed Delia first. She picked up on the second ring and said my name in a tone that suggested she had placed me on a shelf where I couldn't smudge anything. I'm chasing a reference, I said. A note points to page 231. Silence, just long enough to register. Of what, Mr. Goodwin? The memoir. If you think I've seen galleys, you flatter my rank, she said. I haven't. Try the publisher. No instinct? Not even to say, don't be absurd, it's 213. That sounds precise, she said, dry. You don't need my instincts if you already have someone else's. She hung up like a librarian closing hours. I gave Wolfe the play. His eyes stayed at half-mast. Proceed. Mrs. Vance next. She answered with her name, brittle as icicles. We're following a thread, I told her, a page 231 thread. That landed and skittered. 2, what? No, I don't know the book. I told you I haven't seen it. You've never heard anyone mention a specific page. No, she said, and anger scratched through the fear. If you think I'm slipping you secret clues, I'm not. I came to you openly, Mr. Goodwin. She inhaled. Is there something on that page? That, I said, is what we're going to find out. She exhaled into the receiver. Something frayed there, and we ended it. Wolfe's index finger rotated once in the air, a phoneless dial. Kellogg. Marta Kellogg answered from inside a hollow made of glass and time management. Mr. Goodwin, I'm between calls. 1 minute. Then I'll be a sprinter. What does page 231 say? In which book? She asked, very cool. Professor Redmayne's. I haven't seen it, she said, the consonants clipped clean. Our council has. I don't keep numbers in my head unless they have dollar signs. You understand numbers with other signs, I told her, and waited. There was a faint click, either a pen or a thought being capped. Ask Mr. Spade, she said, and ended her minute. I looked at Wolfe. No flinch. Try the assistant, he said. Owen Harcourt's voice came hushed and winded, like the phone had caught him on a staircase or a conscience. Mr. Goodwin? Page 231, I said. What's on it? An audible swallow. 231? No, 213. The chapter break after it. That's where the professor, puts the thing with the curtain, the insinuation. You're sure? I indexed the draft twice, he said, strained, and I argued about the heading on 213. He changed it to make it nastier. That's useful, I said. Keep inhaling. I relayed, and Wolfe nodded once as if Harcourt had returned a borrowed tool. So, he said, the interloper wished us to grope in a different corner. He prefers we not reach the curtain at its proper seam. That narrows our prankster, I said, to anyone with motive to delay us, and a means into our house. Not motive, Wolfe murmured. Urgency. Someone who fears that our attention, fixed where it belongs, will find the thread. The phone rang again. I grabbed it. Saul. Our professor took a walk, he said. 10:40 last night. He went to a mailbox and sent another thick envelope. Different box from earlier. Then he circled 2 blocks like a cat and stood across from your place for 3 minutes. He didn't approach. A car idled mid-block, not his. He went home. You get the plate? On the car, yes. Registered to Hart and Burroughs. Publisher pool car. Thanks, Saul, I relayed. Wolfe's lids did not budge. Surveillance, he said, soft. That makes the publisher our peeping Tom, I said, or their lawyer's idea of romance. Call Hart and Burroughs, Wolfe said. I did, and asked for legal. Celia Brand came on with the same pleasant efficiency, embalmed and airtight. Mr. Goodwin? Nice of your car to enjoy our block, I said. A coincidence, she said, without any of the bother of surprise. We had a messenger in your neighborhood. Let me save you future gas. What's on 213? I don't discuss manuscripts with third parties, she said, still smiling with her voice. If your client has concerns, she should instruct her counsel. She's instructed Wolfe, I told her. He doesn't bill by the page. Neither do I, Celia said, and disconnected. Wolfe shifted his weight the 1/4 inch that counts as a move. Archie, the brownstone trespass is intolerable. Before we address galleys and lawyers, we address our door. He pressed a buzzer. Fritz appeared as if he had been waiting in the wall. Fritz, Wolfe said, in my absence this morning, did any person come within 4 feet of this desk? Fritz's offense blossomed like a rash. No, sir. I dusted at 8:45 before the orchids. After, I vacuumed the hall, arranged the herb pots in the kitchen window, and polished the brass on the banister. The office remained closed. I would not. He stopped, sniffed the air, then frowned. There is an odor I do not like. Odor, Wolfe repeated. Paper and lemon, Fritz said, closing his eyes to draw it better. Not polish. Something sharper. Mailroom cleaner, I said. Or hands that handle cartons and fight the smell. Or the adhesive on a tamper, Wolfe said. He looked at me. The windows in the front room on the street. Check the latch. And the transom. They were locked, and the paint along the sash hadn't been disturbed. But on the transom's inside corner, where no human nose but Fritz's would have bothered, there was the faintest smear duller than the surrounding gloss. I brought Wolfe the news. He lifted a brow. A slip of plastic through the crack, he decided. Hook on the chain, lift the latch, reach. Not a gentleman. He'll get a warmer welcome if he tries again, I said. Do we invite him? We force him, Wolfe said. Archie, telephone Miss Shaw. Tell her we require the reading room for our purposes this evening at 8. She will close it to the public at 7 and attend with Miss Kellogg, Mr. Brigham, Mr. Harcourt, and Mr. Spade. Inform Mrs. Vance. Send a note to Professor Redmayne. No phone. Delivered by Saul, requesting his presence at 8:15. That's a party, I said. What's the occasion? Someone has chosen the curtain as a stage, Wolfe said. We shall take their theatre. I started the list. Delia objected to closing early until I told her Wolfe would otherwise bring his inquiry to the board. That persuaded her faster than a cash gift. Marta gave me a lecture about process, and then gave in. Brigham muttered about audits until I asked whether he preferred an audience for the word embezzlement. He discovered flexibility. Spade said, if it must be tonight, it will be tonight. Harcourt agreed in a strangled whisper. Mrs. Vance said she would be there, and then said nothing else for a full 5 seconds that sounded like prayer. Saul said he would hand-deliver the note to the professor and watch him read it. By 4 o'clock, the brownstone had regained its normal temperature. The trespass, however, lingered like smoke. I did 2 laps of the block and clocked the publisher's pool car twice, once heading east, once back west, a conscientious goldfish. The driver wore the generic cap of deniability. He didn't like being seen. I enjoyed it for him. Back inside, Fritz arrived with beer for Wolfe and coffee for me. Wolfe accepted the beer but did not drink. He stared at the altered note until it might have confessed. At 5:20, the phone barked again. Saul, he read your note, grunted, and wrote a second on his own letterhead to someone named J.S. I tailed it to a private mailbox store. He slid it into box 19. The clerk says the renter is Gillian Stone. Stone, I repeated. Or a lie, Saul said. I have a photocopy of the rental form. The ID number is a boat license. Wolfe's finger stopped its rotation. Stone, he said. Archie, I'm here. Go to the foundation at 7:30. Examine the curtain panel behind the code pad. If there is paper lodged there, folded thin, bring it. If there is not, examine the floorboard molding along the right jamb for a sliver out of place. You expect a treasure map? I expect a stagehand's tape, he said. Someone who alters numbers with confidence also hides notes where air moves, but hands don't. If there is nothing, Puy. But if there is something, we will have a hand to seize. He closed his eyes, finished not drinking his beer, and let the house be very still. I sat with a fresh pencil and all the names pinwheeling in my head. Widow, director, archivist, financier, professor, assistant, counsel, chair, and now a stone with a rented box, and listened to the brownstone breathe. Outside, the wind worried the street like a rumor. Inside, in our sanctum, a smear of dull paint caught what was left of the light and refused to shine. At 7:30, I was on the limestone step with the wind pushing at my back like it had an appointment inside. Delia met me at the door with keys strung on a lanyard and the demeanor of a person who had already regretted agreeing to this. The reading room was empty, but for the lamps glowing like well-behaved moons. She'd cleared the last patrons at 7 sharp and posted a placard about collections review. If anyone complained, they'd complain to Marta, which seemed to give Delia a private comfort. 8 o'clock, she said, and folded herself into a chair to watch me not touch things. I went straight to the curtain, parted it like a priest blessing the nave, and found the panel, a small metal faceplate the size of a deck of cards, flush to the wall, with a sliver of gap on the left where a paint ridge had dried, obstinate. I let my thumbnail hunt for an edge that wasn't there, then used the back of my pen the way a tailor uses a bone. The faceplate lifted a whisper. Something thin sighed behind it. I coaxed out a strip of paper, folded to the width of a match, and held it to the light. It was a carbon copy ribboned in dust. On it, a date and 2 times typed in the same impatient hand as the log. 9:47, sensor active. 10:12, sensor active. Beneath, 2 initials scratched in pencil. The first you could have carved in granite, DS. The second was a ghost of graphite. Faint, corrected, written over, MK replaced with DS. "Delia," I said. Her chair didn't creak. She didn't move. "If you accuse me of forging my own initials, I'll show you 300 pages where I did it correctly." She crossed and took the sliver from me, her face not changing and her pulse visible at the throat. "That—" She stopped. "No. I didn't pencil over anything. I logged one incident at 9:47. "There were 2, I said. "Either the wall lies or the log does." She closed her eyes. "The wall doesn't lie. I didn't see a second. I went home at 10. Marta and Harlan were still upstairs with the donor. If something tripped again at 10:12, it wasn't me who hushed it." We both looked at the curtain then, as though it might confess. I called Wolfe. He let me describe it all before he spoke, which meant he had been thinking faster than I could talk. "Bring the strip," he said. "Do not confront. Seat them. When they are contained, I will speak." "Saul?" "Across the street," Saul said from my other line. "Publisher car on the corner. Driver watching the door." "Let him enjoy the cold," Wolfe said, and cut off, which wasn't personal. It was tactical. They arrived with the staggered punctuality of people who resent being summoned. Marta first, seconds before 8, composed as a clean sheet of paper. Brigham with an accountant's winter pallor. Harlan Spade with a walking stick, and the air of money that keeps its hands spread to show its emptiness. Owen Harcourt slipped in at their heels, eyes on his shoes. Mrs. Vance came at 8:03 with her coat buttoned to the throat and a face that had practiced composure and didn't trust it. Delia stayed where she was, and by staying, made it look like she was in charge of her own room. I moved the party to the long table under the lamps. I put the curtain at the far end like a spectator brought in as evidence. A black bakelite speaker squatted at the center of the table, tuned by Fritz for Wolfe's voice. When the last chair scraped, I clicked it on. Wolfe's good evening poured out rich and dry as if he were seated at the head in person. "I thank you," he said, "for indulging my indolence. I dislike leaving my chair for scenes, and the reading room is a scene. We will avoid melodrama. Mr. Goodwin will show you an object." I laid the thin slip on a blotter and pushed it to the center. They leaned, a human tide. Marta didn't. She held position and let the paper come to her gaze. "It was lodged behind the panel," I said, "typed with 2 times. The second is not in the log we've seen. The initials tell their own tale." "Do they?" Harlan Spade said. His voice had the dry rasp of a winter radiator. "They tell me we have a prankster with access to office supplies." "They tell me," Wolfe said, and his voice cooled the room a degree, "that the sensor activated twice on the night Mr. Vance died. Once at 9:47, which Miss Shaw silenced. Once at 10:12, which was not logged in the ordinary record. Someone attempted, clumsily, to indicate that Miss Kellogg silenced it and then to erase that indication." Marta's pen, a slim silver javelin, sat flat on the table. "If the suggestion is that I crept down to the reading room for a tryst behind a curtain." "The suggestion," Wolfe said, almost bored, "is that you silenced the second alarm and failed to enter it in the book. The motive for the omission may be innocence. You intended to log it later and forgot. That would be imprudent, not criminal. But if you did not silence it, who did? Mr. Spade?" Spade's mouth set. "I was upstairs. The donor you alluded to, Mrs. Hargreaves, she wanted to endow a lecture series. Marta and I explained why the tax benefit was superior if she timed it with her stock sale. You may telephone her. She'll tell you we belabored her until after 10:15, and that she imagined us both as accountants in the next life." "Brigham," Wolfe said. "I was in my office," Brigham muttered. "I left at 9:30. I have a subway receipt, if you like." "I don't," Wolfe said. "Miss Shaw?" Her chin went up one notch. "I logged the first alarm. I did not see the second. I left at 10. I took the Bleecker bus and read a paperback about sailors who don't sail. If anyone silenced the second, it was not me." "Mrs. Vance?" "I was at home," she said, but the way her hands clenched around the clutch deducted points from anyone inclined to believe without worry. "I had been here earlier to collect papers. I left before 9:30. I didn't return." "Mr. Harcourt?" Owen's throat worked. I was at the copy stand. Professor Redmayne had told me to make clean pages of the chapter for his lawyer. I left at 10. I didn't hear a second alarm." Wolfe let the silence grow leaves. Outside, a horn bleated and died. Inside, the lamps hummed. The curtain hung still. When Wolfe chose to speak, he did it as if he were reading a recipe and had decided none of us would be permitted to taste. "Here is what now obtains," he said. "Professor Redmayne asserts that the curtain conceals a scandal that justifies his libels. A note was delivered to my house, enjoining us to ask her about the curtain and citing a page in the manuscript. Later, someone entered my office by means that offended my chain and altered the page number. Meanwhile, a second activation of your sensor is obscured by a crude scrape of initials. I take it that you see the thread that runs through these." "No," Spade said, and his knuckles whitened on the stick. "I see theatrics." "You would," Wolfe said. "The thread is manipulation. Someone is placing crumbs and smearing fingerprints to direct attention toward a particular construct, the curtain as boudoir, the widow as confederate, the foundation as looted chest. If you think me credulous of crumbs, you are more foolish than I hope." "Then whom do you accuse?" Marta asked evenly. "Accuse, no. Invite, yes," Wolfe said. "Mr. Goodwin, open the door." I did. Saul stepped in and took a chair by the wall. He looked like a lamp that had decided to be useful. "Professor Redmayne will be here in 4 minutes," Wolfe said. "When he arrives, we will ask him a question he cannot refuse. Who is Gillian Stone?" Owen flinched. It wasn't theatrical. It was involuntary. Marta looked from face to face, saw nothing she liked, and drew in a breath to object. Spade said, "Flat. I don't know the name." "Nor do I," Brigham added. "Should I?" "Miss Shaw?" Wolfe asked. "I catalogue manuscripts, not pseudonyms," she said, though her eyes had cooled by a degree I could measure with a ruler. Mrs. Vance was still. The stillness had a different quality than fear now. It had calculation in it, and grief, and a decision not yet made. "Gillian Stone," Wolfe said, "rents a private mailbox into which Professor Redmayne deposited a letter tonight addressed to J.S. I suppose that letter contains instructions or money or both. My inference, note the word, is that Gillian Stone is a screen for someone connected to this institution or its adversaries, someone whose identity would, if exposed, crack the pretty pot Redmayne is trying to carry to the boil." "You infer a great deal," Spade said. "I infer just enough," Wolfe countered. "Let us see how much the professor confirms of his own vanity." The door opened before I could reply. Redmayne arrived 2 minutes early, which told me Saul's note had done a better job than flattery. He took in the semicircle, the speaker, and the curtain, and smiled the way a man smiles at a portrait of himself. "So," he boomed, "we convene in the temple. Is this the part where you bless the widow and banish me?" "Sit," I told him. He did, houndstooth creaking like a conscience. Wolfe didn't bother with preamble. "Professor, who is Gillian Stone?" Redmayne's lips opened, closed, then snared. "A lawyer." "Then you will name her firm," Wolfe said. "A private counsel," he hedged, "retained to protect me from harassment." Harassment like letters placed in rented boxes, I said. You mailed her an hour ago. He looked around for a friendly face and found none. Marta's neutrality had become a blade. Spade's eyes were slits. Brigham blinked too often. Delia watched the curtain like it might spring. Harcourt stared at his hands. Mrs. Vance was a statue with a pulse. Wolfe's voice flattened. You will tell us whether Gillian Stone is Miss Kellogg's creature or Miss Shaw's or yours or the publisher's. It's mine, Redmayne said too quickly. A convenience. Then produce her, Wolfe said softly. Or I shall present my convenience. That Gillian Stone is an alias adopted by the person who tampered with my note and by the hand that erased initials on that slip in front of you. And that hand belongs to the person who most urgently requires the curtain to mean what you say it means. The lamps hummed on. A gust pressed the window and withdrew. The curtain didn't move. Redmayne's eyes finally found the slip and saw the faint MK beneath Delia's letters like a bruise under makeup. For once, he had no oration. We will proceed, Wolfe said, and the timbre of his voice tightened the circle by an inch. We will proceed because the time and the page and the person behind the page will not wait. Redmayne reached for the slip as if his fingers could erase it better than a pencil. I put my hand flat on the blotter, and he stopped. You can talk a lecturer down faster with a palm than with a paragraph. He settled for a sniff. Spade's stick clicked once against the floor. He didn't mind the noise he was making. Marta's pen hadn't moved, but you could feel it thinking. Delia's eyes were on the wall panel like she could see through the paint to the habit lurking behind it. Harcourt's pulse had relocated to his throat and was trying to hitchhike out. Wolfe's voice stayed smooth. Professor, the change to my note, the transposition of numerals, is petty. The erasure on this strip is clumsy. You, whatever your sins, are neither petty nor clumsy. Therefore, someone else tends your garden and you water their weeds. Redmayne bristled. If you mean to accuse me of employing tricksters, I mean to ask, Wolfe said, who besides your publisher has handled the manuscript? Names. Copy editor, he muttered. Two, perhaps. My lawyer, a researcher who checked dates, and my assistant. Whose name is Mr. Harcourt, Wolfe said. We have met him. He is unpracticed at fraud and too frightened of you to improvise. Your lawyer is not Gillian Stone. Your researcher? Independent, Redmayne said, glaring at the slip as if it had libeled him. A freelancer. Name, Wolfe repeated. Jessamine Stone, he snapped, then winced at himself. I didn't bother looking at Saul. He doesn't gloat with his face. Marta's pen turned a fraction clockwise. Delia didn't move, which was its own movement. Jessamine, I said, spelled the long way. Jessamine, he ground out. She bills as J. Stone? Of course she does, Wolfe said, and rents a box as Gillian. Pfui, Mr. Goodwin. Present. You will telephone the mailbox store and ask if Miss Stone retrieved a letter in the last hour. On it, I said, and stepped into the hall. Saul followed with 3 strides and a nod to let me have the phone. The clerk recognized my voice by its impatience and said a woman had come at 7:55, scarf and glasses, quick hands. She signed J. Stone and left with 1 envelope and a magazine as cover. No, he didn't see where she went. No, he didn't keep camera footage because the owner thought cameras discouraged business. I thanked him for his commitment to laissez-faire crime and hung up. Back in the room, Wolfe listened without interrupting. Very good, he said. Professor, when did you hire Miss Stone? 6 months, he said. She came recommended by Hart and Burroughs. She's thorough. She is enterprising, Wolfe corrected. Miss Kellogg, has the publisher ever paid any consultant of yours? Her eyes didn't flicker. No. Mr. Spade? No, he said and meant it. Mr. Brigham. He looked at his hands like numbers might crawl onto them to rescue him. No. Miss Shaw, Wolfe said. Her chin rose another notch. I have never taken a penny from a publisher. Mrs. Vance. I haven't either, she said, and frost had crept back into her voice. Mr. Wolfe, if you have finished implying that everyone is for sale, kindly explain why we're here. To show you the market, Wolfe said. Professor, Ms. Stone's function was to harvest slander dressed as scholarship. She learned your fetish for the curtain. Why, I don't yet know. And she tended it. It served her to direct you toward the widow, for reasons of her own employer or another. And it served someone here to use that same fetish as screen and sieve. You keep saying someone here, Marta said. Name one. I prefer to offer opportunity, Wolfe said. Archie, the panel. I stepped to the wall. Delia was already there, hands folded, eyes saying she'd allow it because she wanted to see where he was going. I lifted the faceplate and showed the mouth it covered, a shallow box with the wire and the sensor head, a dust rim, and, in the lower right corner, a darker rectangle no wider than a postage stamp where dust refused to settle. I slid a fingernail under it and lifted a wafer of cloth tape the color of regret. Under it, a second, already half unstuck. Under that, a third, creased. Wolfe's voice came very mild. One application of cloth tape might dampen a jittery sensor during a draft. 2 suggests habit. 3, intention. Miss Shaw? Her face didn't change. I've never taped that sensor. Miss Kellogg? I don't crawl behind curtains, she said. I hire facilities. Mr. Brigham? He had devolved into a man concerned about lint. No. Mr. Spade? I have a spine, not a ladder, he said. Owen, I said, because he'd tried to become a coat rack. Tape familiar? Professor Redmayne once asked me to keep the alarm from interrupting his meeting. I told him I couldn't disable it. He asked if facilities had a trick. I didn't know. I left. When I came back, it was quiet. He looked at his shoes. He said it was behaving. Redmayne's color climbed. It was nothing, he barked. The thing beeps whenever a patron sighs. Archie, Wolfe said. Tell them what the second time means. It means someone used the exit at 10:12, I said, or wanted the log to say no one did. If the tape was on, a push could trip the sensor just enough to blink, then die. If it wasn't, someone hushed it. Either way, the record wanted to forget. Professor, Wolfe said, on page 213, your chapter breaks with an insinuation that the widow fled, or arrived, or rendezvoused. You designed your staging to make the curtain a boudoir, but the curtain was being used as a blind for a door. And the door, where does it open? Delia answered because silence offended her, more than speaking did. An alley between buildings, delivery carts, 2 cameras that don't work when it rains. Who knew the code? Wolfe asked. I did, Delia said. Facilities. Marta. Harlan? Wolfe asked. No, Marta said. Harlan, Spade said dryly. Knows men with codes. That's different. Yes, Wolfe agreed. Professor, who met you in that alley during your meeting? He pushed back from the table so hard the chair scooted like a crab. I met no one. Your insinuations are slander. Who brought you galleys stamped confidential before your publisher's courier did? Wolfe pressed, implacable. Who handed you clippings from internal audits on paper not yet filed? Who promised you a cache of board minutes and then failed to deliver until after Mr. Vance collapsed? Harcourt made a small sound. It might have been air or courage. Someone, slipped an envelope under the staff entrance door, he blurted. Twice. The first had donor lists. The second had an edited transcript of a board call. We thought... His eyes went to Marta and flinched away. We thought it was a disgruntled clerk. Name on the envelope? I asked. J. Stone, he whispered. There are moments when a room decides to be honest. The reading room tried and didn't quite make it. Spade leaned his stick on the table, both hands spread. Marta's pen was still. Her gaze wasn't. Brigham swallowed the idea he was innocent and found it stuck halfway. Delia watched the window now, not the panel. Redmayne wanted a podium, found none, and grabbed outrage instead. "You see," he declared, seizing the air. "My sources are many. The widow's cabal cannot smother every voice. The public will—" "Public," Wolfe said, and poured ground glass into the word. "You're a loud man on small stilts, Professor." "Sit." It wasn't a request. He sat. "Now," Wolfe went on, "we will forego theatrics and employ a small experiment. Mr. Goodwin, close the door to the alley and engage the bar. Miss Kellogg, if you will oblige, enter your code and attempt the reset. Then we will ask Miss Shaw to do the same. We will see whose hand knows the depth of the panel without looking." Marta didn't lift a brow. "You're asking whether muscle memory betrays me?" "I'm giving you all an opportunity to be believed," Wolfe said. "I do not depend on belief. I prefer demonstration." I swung the door out, took a greeting from the alley's damp air, and let it ease back. The sensor blinked a prim red. Marta came past me without brushing, slid her hand behind the curtain, and tapped the panel like a pianist striking two tentative notes. The sensor blinked, hesitated, and quit. She stepped aside. Delia went next. Her hand disappeared into the fold and, without looking, reached under and pressed at the lower right corner first, precisely where the tape had been. Then the code, calm and practiced. The blink died so fast you might think it had imagined itself. She withdrew her hand, eyed the panel as if it had betrayed her by being obvious, and said, "That proves I turn off alarms." "I do." "So?" "So," Wolfe said, "you do not turn them off at 10:12 when you're on a bus reading about sailors. It proves that someone else had occasion that night. A person with motive to move unseen through that door with papers they did not wish logged, and then to polish the record to favor a scandal that would distract from their traffic." Marta folded her arms. "And who is that person?" "In 5 minutes," Wolfe said, and I could see him in my head, the way he rests one finger on the desk and uses it like a metronome. "Professor Redmayne will tell us, because he cannot help himself. He has a vanity that must assign heroic parts. He will name a midwife to his chapter, and that name will either prove my inference or give me the last knot I need." Redmayne laughed, but it was ragged. The air had borrowed sandpaper. "You think you can make me betray a source?" "I don't have to," Wolfe said lazily. "You already did, when you said Miss Stone came recommended by Hart and Burroughs. You take recommendations as gospel. You never ask who paid for the hymnals. Tell me who first said the word curtain to you." He held out for 3 seconds. That was his best. "Spade," he said, "at a board dinner. He joked that all the Foundation's secrets lived behind one curtain because the rest of the walls were glass. I thought it a metaphor. Then a week later, the censor note appeared in my mail. Anonymous." Spade's stick didn't move, but his eyes turned slowly to Marta, then to Delia, then back to the curtain, as if he were searching for a ghost he might once have thought charming. Marta's lips parted and shut. Delia finally looked away from the window. Harcourt's breath made a tiny wheeze. Wolfe exhaled, almost satisfied. "Thank you," he said. "It is time to stop following crumbs. It is time to eat." Wolfe didn't hurry. He never does. He let the room settle around that last line until the table felt smaller and the lamps brighter. When he spoke again, the voice from the speaker was almost conversational. "Mr. Spade, your jest about the curtain, it gave a word to a scavenger. Professor, you dressed that word in gossip, but the use of the door at 10:12 was not for romance. It was for traffic, who needed an unlogged exit that night." Spade spread his hands. "If you're angling for the board, try a different river. The board leaves by the front." "Of course," Wolfe said. "Miss Kellogg?" She tilted her head. You believe I smuggled something out at 10:12, and then I came back, erased my letter, and forgot to destroy a carbon that lived behind a faceplate for months? You flatter my competence while insulting my intelligence. You mistake me, Wolfe said mildly. I rarely flatter. You are competent. Your intelligence is not at issue, only your appetite. Harcourt shifted like his chair had grown teeth. Redmayne looked at him with a teacher's fondness for a student who might confess by mistake. Delia's gaze slid to the alley door and back, taking measurements the way some people breathe. Appetite, Marta repeated. For what? Control, Wolfe said. The sort that cannot be achieved while a widow holds moral authority and a founder's habits haunt your bookkeeping. Brigham flinched. It was small and could have been a hiccup, but I'd have laid odds. I said, let's not be shy about words. Temporary reallocation, Mr. Brigham. His head came up too fast. It was authorized. Short-term smoothing. Pledges lag. Vendors don't. You borrow restricted funds for cash flow and replace them when the pledge clears. That is unlawful without donor consent, Marta said crisply, not missing a beat. And we do not do it. Brigham looked at her like she'd changed a dance step mid-waltz. We? Mr. Brigham, Wolfe cut in, silk wrapped around steel. Did Mr. Vance ever sign a memo authorizing such smoothing? He initialed a ledger entry the year before, Brigham said, sweat surfacing like a bad idea. He knew the mechanics. He insisted on replacement within the quarter. And after he died, I said. Who insisted? Marta's voice cooled another degree. Procedures did. Procedures don't write checks, I said. People do. If restricted funds were borrowed after Mr. Vance's death, it was because someone decided to do it and decided not to tell the board just how often. Spade's stick clicked twice before he caught himself. Is this an audit or a séance? It is the former dressed as the latter to keep you at the table, Wolfe said. Professor, your manuscript accuses Mr. Vance of embezzlement. That is wrong. The manipulations you half glimpsed were not his. They were the work of a survivor with insufficient scruple and an excess of faith in secrecy. Redmayne opened his mouth. Wolfe closed it for him with the next sentence. And you, Professor, were fed documents to confirm your favorite scandal precisely, so you would shout them in a book and give cover. The noise you make is useful. It attracts attention where someone points and away from where someone acts. Redmayne swallowed, angry because he could not arrange a speech fast enough. If you claim I am a dupe— I don't claim, I observe, Wolfe said. Miss Stone was recommended to you by your publisher, likely by the same mind that put a car on our block and suggested that the word curtain be your lodestar. She collected documents from an ally here who needed your outrage more than your accuracy. Marta's eyes were on me now, not the speaker. Your ally, she said, meaning Wolfe. You imagine I use this author as a cudgel to drive the widow out? Absurd. I don't need cudgels. I have bylaws. And votes, Spade added dryly. Votes follow stories, Wolfe said. A widow under a cloud loses them. A director who appears decisive gains them. You leak a log note, a donor list, an edited transcript that shows doubt about cash flow, and then you wait. The professor turns them into a chorus, and you conduct. Delia spoke for the first time in minutes, quiet and flat. If I had a chorus, I'd pick a better tenor. Harcourt let out a strangled sound that wanted to be a laugh, and died. Redmayne glared at him. You'll find another job shelving pamphlets, he hissed. Enough, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin. I knew the cue. I set the small envelope on the table, the one I'd pulled from my inside pocket when Delia had been watching me not touch things. I slit it and tipped the contents. 3 photocopies, each stamped draft across the top, each a page of board minutes with 1 paragraph excised. I spread them like a dealer. These, I said, came to the professor in 2 deliveries under the staff door. The excised paragraph in each references a motion by the executive director to temporarily reassign restricted funds. The motion is tabled pending founder review. Whoever made these copies wanted the references to survive, but not the tabling. Spade's eyes flicked to Marta and away. Conveniently incomplete, he said. Convenient enough that a man looking for outrage could find it without the boring break, I said. Who has access to the originals and to a copier after hours? Who knows where the staff door gaps? Who knows which sentences to remove? Marta didn't blink. If you think I made those copies, you're duller than your hat. I would not leave the stamp. Exactly, Wolfe said. You would not. But a subordinate who admires you might, thinking the stamp makes it look official. Mr. Harcourt admires. He stamps. Miss Shaw does not admire. She labels. Mr. Brigham panics. He sweats. Professor Redmayne preens. He prints. Delia turned her head an inch. Admiration, she said. You think Owen delivered those? I think Owen can be prodded by authority he wishes to please, Wolfe said. But I don't think he cut the paragraphs. That required choice, and the hand that chose the words also taped the censor and erased an initial badly. That hand belongs to someone who is accustomed to systems, but not to forgery, who lives at the intersection of authority and impatience. Marta's pen didn't move. Her shoulders did, almost imperceptibly. You keep circling me, she said. Is this the part where you land? No, Wolfe said. This is the part where you call your ally to confirm you are holding the center. She smiled without joy. My ally? The one waiting in the car from your publisher, Wolfe said. Miss Brand's driver has idled long enough to chill his tires. He's not waiting for the professor. He knows he's inside. He's waiting for a signal that you will bring him something or tell him something. You will telephone now and tell him to go. Why would I? Because, Wolfe said, iron under velvet. If you don't, I will call the police and ask them to impound his car and its contents. I prefer not to invite the law to our rehearsal, but I will do it if pushed. For a heartbeat, everything in Marta stilled. Then she reached for her phone with a neat, economical motion and dialed a number from memory. Go, she said, and put the phone down. Outside, a car engine engaged and faded east. Spade exhaled through his nose. You two have been very busy, he told Wolfe. We have been quiet, Wolfe said. Miss Kellogg, do not mistake quiet for idle. Now, Mrs. Vance. She started. Being named had become a sensation in that room. Yes? You came here for rescue, Wolfe said. You will not get it by sainting your husband. He permitted practices that were unwise. He indulged a director whose drive outran her prudence. You tolerated this because you disliked conflict more than you feared drift. And now your foundation is a sea with many captains. Her lips tightened. Then you will let them drown me. I will not let anyone drown you, Wolfe said softly. But I will not let you drown yourself either. If you want to keep the foundation, you must want the truth more than you want revenge. Tonight you will listen. Tomorrow you will hire an independent auditor and publish their report in full. You will invite the Attorney General's office to review your restricted accounts, and you will tell your board that Professor Redmayne may print whatever he likes because you will have already printed better. Redmayne slammed a palm on the table. I will show them. You will show them a book with pretty sentences and ugly sources, Wolfe said. If you insist on printing, do it, but do it knowing your midwife was paid to deliver a rumor. And if you think your publisher's counsel will lift a finger after an AG letter arrives, you haven't read their indemnities. Celia Brand wasn't in the room, but she might as well have been. I could feel her calculating reputation curves and deciding whether a professor was ballast or cargo. Marta's veneer cracked a hair. If she does that, if she drags the AG in, the donors will flee. Then let them, Wolfe said. The ones who remain will be those who support museums and not melodramas. You can lead them if you like wise work more than fast. She swallowed something too sharp to go down easy. And if I refuse? Then, Wolfe said pleasantly, Mr. Goodwin will deliver to the Attorney General copies of the strip from the panel, the photocopied minutes with surgical wounds, and a sworn statement from your assistant describing deliveries under a door. I will also include the plate number of your publisher's courier, and a note about a hired researcher with an alias that rhymes with convenience. It will be an untidy package. I warn you, Miss Kellogg, prosecutors abhor untidiness. Silence. Long enough to hear a page turn 2 rooms away, long enough for Owen to realize his life was already changing, long enough for Delia to decide whether she was going to enjoy what came next or endure it. Spade watched Marta, not with enemy's eyes, but with a partner's, calculating whether she would break and if he should help her bend. Brigham had stopped sweating and started breathing again, which I chalked up as a small victory for his pause. Marta looked at the curtain. When she spoke, the steel was back, but the angle had shifted. If I agree to the audit and the AG review, will you say publicly that there was no adultery behind that curtain? I will say, Wolfe replied, that the curtain concealed an exit, not a bed. That is the truth. The rest you will learn. She nodded once. Fine. Redmayne lurched. You cannot. I can, Marta said, not looking at him. You leveraged our mess for your book. We'll leverage your noise for a cleansing. Mr. Spade? He rested both hands over the stick and nodded, slow and unamused. It's either a pillar or a collapse, he said. Pillars make better stories in annual reports. Mr. Brigham, Wolfe said, you will gather your ledgers and you will sleep well tonight for the first time in a year. Brigham croaked, yes, like a man who had found absolution in arithmetic. Miss Shaw, Wolfe said, you will prepare a public note on the censor, the panel, and the procedure. Spare adjectives. People trust nouns. She met the curtain's gaze. They won't read it. They will if it is short and true, Wolfe said. Professor, he added, and this time Redmayne didn't look away fast enough. You will decide whether you prefer to be a writer with corrections or a spectacle without a platform. You may discover your publisher likes writers. He made a strangled sound. This is dinner time, Wolfe said, and I could hear Fritz in the shape of the words. Archie, you will escort them out. Tomorrow at 11, Mrs. Vance will attend at my office with Mr. Spade and Miss Kellogg. I will expect commitments in writing. Good evening. The speaker clicked and settled into its own hush. No one moved for a count of 3. Then chairs scraped, people found their coats, and the curtain kept hanging like a good lie that had discovered it wasn't needed anymore. Morning came grey and civil. Fritz set out corn muffins like a truce offering, and Wolfe ate 2, which meant the world was not, in fact, ending. At 10:30, Saul checked in from a corner drugstore where the coffee was a witness protection program for beans. Ms. Stone lives in a walk-up on 54th, he said. She left at 9, bought lemon wipes and a legal pad, and came downtown. She's on your stoop. Kindly invite her in, Wolfe told him. He hung up and regarded the room as if it had volunteered for inspection. Archie, put the extra chair by the globe. There will be 4. At 11 sharp, Mrs. Vance arrived with Harlan Spade and Marta Kellogg in a triangle that pretended equality. Marta carried a folder. Spade carried his stick and the look of a man prepared to sign things and make calls. Mrs. Vance carried nothing. She had decided correctly that she'd been carrying too much already. Saul ushered in the 4th. Jessamine Stone, early 30s. Neat coat, eyes that wanted to inventory every exit and count the spoons. She smelled faintly of lemon. Wolfe inclined his head the precise degree that discourages chatter. Miss Stone, he said, you were the researcher on Professor Redmayne's book. I am an independent fact-checker, she said, sliding into the chair like she planned to back out of it. Hart and Burroughs keeps a list. They recommended you, Wolfe finished. So we've heard. He didn't glance at Saul, which was his method of crediting Saul. You also rented a mailbox as Gillian Stone. You collected letters addressed to J.S.? You retrieved one last evening at 7:55. Her mouth tightened. You've been working hard? No, Wolfe said. I've been thinking. Mr. Panzer has been working. You entered my house yesterday to alter a numeral on a note. She didn't flinch. Trained faces rarely do. But her hand, which had reached for her bag, retreated empty. That's absurd, she said carefully. I don't burgle. You don't, Wolfe agreed. You consult. Someone else let you in. Someone with a strip of plastic and a habit. He or she worked the chain and latch. You stood while they worked. You took the note from the blotter and, with a felt tip, transposed a 1 and a 3. You intended to waste our evening. You failed. I watched her calculate whether deny, or deny, then pivot had the better odds. She picked the pivot. Mr. Wolfe, you have clients, and I have clients. One of yours asked you to destroy a book. One of mine asks me to help ensure it survives an attempt to be destroyed. That's not a crime. It depends where you place your hands, Wolfe said dryly. Miss Kellogg, your folder. Marta laid 3 typed sheets on the blotter like surgical instruments. A letter to the Attorney General requesting a review of restricted funds, she said, clipped. A board resolution committing to an independent audit and to publishing it in full, and a statement for release confirming that rumors about a tryst behind a curtain are untrue and arose from a malfunctioning censor. Drafted before or after sleep, I asked. After none, she said. Spade nodded without humor. We'll pass them at 4, he said. If we agree on language today, the signatures can be wet by noon tomorrow. Mrs. Vance's hands were steady on her bag. She didn't reach for the papers. And the book? The book, Wolfe said, is Professor Redmayne's problem. Miss Stone can advise him to excise libels. Miss Brand can advise him to prefer law to legend. If he insists on printing speculation as scandal, he will find himself reading his own reviews in court filings. Jessamine Stone's eyes cooled. You have a flair for threats, Mr. Wolfe. I have a distaste for stupidity, Wolfe said. We will dispense with theatrics. The truth is this. Mr. Vance permitted a practice, smoothing, that was tolerable while his discipline enforced it, and dangerous once he died. Miss Kellogg, under pressure to appear effective, rationalized its continuance. Mr. Brigham executed it and perspired. When questions arose, Miss Kellogg saw advantage in allowed distraction, a book that confused improvidence with theft and virtue with prudery. The Publishers' Council, timid of libel, installed you to salt the professor's stew with documents, some of them carefully incomplete. The curtain, a joke of Mr. Spade's, was adopted as emblem and stage, and the second censor ping at 10:12. Miss Kellogg silenced it after sending, through that door, items she did not want logged. Minutes with paragraphs missing, donor lists, and a staff chart annotated in a hand that was not hers. Marta didn't blink. You have no proof of my hand on the panel at 10:12. You're right, Wolfe said. I have proof of your impulse. Your initials began to replace Miss Shaw's on a carbon tucked behind the plate, then were erased badly. You are a woman trained to control documents, not deface them. Your instinct betrayed you, and I have Mr. Harcourt, who will say, under oath, that deliveries came 2 nights in a row, stamped J. Stone, weeks after you joked in staff that no one reads minutes, but everyone reads a scandal. Harcourt wasn't in the room, but his testimony didn't need legs. Jessamine Stone considered whether to laugh. She didn't. She let her exhale flatten. You're building a pretty edifice on a smudge, she said. If Miss Kellogg wants me to say I never spoke to her, I can say that. She glanced at Marta, and the glance admitted more than any sentence would. Wolfe let the silence sit, then turned his head toward Mrs. Vance. Madame, you will sign those letters. You will stand by them publicly. You will do it not because I tell you to, but because you want your husband's name to mean something besides an argument. Do you agree? She looked at the papers as if they were a threshold. When she answered, it was firm. Yes. Good, Wolfe said. Mr. Spade, I'll shepherd the vote. Spade said, We'll wear our hair shirts together. Miss Kellogg, Wolfe said. She didn't move for a count of 5. Then she said avidly, I'll manage the audit. I'll cooperate fully. I will not, however, permit slander of the staff. You will not need to, Wolfe said. You will name your error and correct it. That is all. He shifted his gaze to Jessamine Stone. You will deliver 2 messages. First to Hart and Burroughs. They will instruct Miss Brand to stop playing courier. Second, to Professor Redmayne. Remove the curtain chapter as written and present only what is provable. If he resists, tell him publishers like liabilities only when they are insured. I don't work for Hart and Burroughs, she said, a little too quickly. No, Wolfe said, but they pay you through a convenient loop. Spare us the geometry. He picked up a page from his desk, my copy of the mailbox rental form Saul had harvested, and let it fall. Do you prefer to meet the Attorney General with me or alone? That fetched a flicker. She stood, then didn't. I'll deliver the messages, she said. Good, Wolfe murmured. Archie, the door. Saul took her out. The room's center of gravity shifted when she left, like a table after a heavy bowl is removed. Wolfe focused on Mrs. Vance. There remains the matter of Redmayne's accusation that you visited the reading room for a liaison. Her chin came up. It is a lie. I know, Wolfe said. But you contributed to its survival. You refused to say where you were at 10 because you feared another truth. That you had argued with your husband earlier that evening about money and about your role. You wanted him to force Miss Kellogg into patience. He refused. You left furious. When he died, you blamed yourself for anger and decided silence was piety. He flicked a hand. If you must confess, confess that. It is human. It does not tamper with exits. For a second she looked younger by years. Then she added 1 year back, the necessary one, and nodded. All right. Spade put a palm on the folder and pushed it toward me. We'll take these and return at 4, he said. You'll have signatures tomorrow. Acceptable, Wolfe said. Miss Kellogg, arrange a locksmith for the reading room door and replace the panel. Miss Shaw will supervise. Mr. Goodwin will deliver a note to Miss Brand with the license plate number of her pool car and a suggestion that she save fuel. Marta rose. You've made enemies, she said, not as a threat, but as a weather report. I don't collect them, Wolfe said. They arrive on their own. He closed his eyes. Good day. When they were gone, the office expanded like a lung. Fritz brought beer and looked at Wolfe as if asking whether civilization was restored. Wolfe took a deep pull and set the glass down as if it contained judgment. You're short 1 flourish, I told him, the widow behind the curtain. He lifted a brow. She hid behind it, I said. Not cloth, a story, her own silence, a kind of piety that let crooks rehearse on her stage. You hold the curtain and found not sin, but drafts. Wolfe's mouth curved. There is more sin in drafts than in beds, he said. Drafts excuse, obscure, and delay. Beds merely declare. He sighed. Fritz? Fritz materialized. Yes, sir? Veal à la crème tonight, and instruct the grocer to send better lemons. The ones we have smell like lies. I grinned. I'll tell him to stock honesty by the pound. Pfui, Wolfe said, but not unkindly. Honesty is not sold, it is eaten at cost. Go telephone Saul, tell him he has earned his fee and may dine. The brownstone was quiet again. Too quiet, if you asked me. A storm like the one we'd just hosted tends to leave echoes even after the participants march off to wrestle their own consciences. But Wolfe's world had a way of absorbing chaos, like the walls were trained to hush it. Wolfe sat in his chair with a glass of beer that he actually drank this time, which was his equivalent of fireworks. He wasn't smiling, not really. but the set of his mouth told me the affair had ended exactly as he had expected. Fritz brought in a platter of sausages with sauerkraut, and the fragrance rose in the room as if announcing victory. I said, "So that's it?" Curtain lifted, director tamed, professor deflated, widow half absolved. The curtain falls, and the play's over. Wolfe snorted softly. Plays end with applause. This ended with signatures and the promise of auditors. Hardly applause. "Still," I said, "it's a decent curtain call." The widow got what she wanted. Her husband's reputation in the clear. The board got their audit before the AG subpoenas them. Marta Kellogg got to keep her chair, bruised but breathing. Redmayne got told he's a fool without an audience. And you got beer. Pfui, he sipped. Mrs. Vance did not get what she wanted. She wanted sanctity. She has instead reality. She must live with her husband as man, not as saint. That is no gift. Maybe not, I said. But compared to being branded an embezzler and a cuckold, reality's a bargain. You saved them all from worse. I did nothing of the sort, Wolfe said. I merely restored proportion. The widow's silence had become a curtain behind which shadows grew grotesque. Miss Kellogg's expedience had become a pretext for theft. The professor's vanity had become an engine of defamation. I cut the curtain, nothing more. Don't undersell yourself, I said. You also gave them a moral to chew. Even Spade looked like he'd learned something, though I wouldn't trust him to pass it on without charging a fee. Wolfe closed his eyes and leaned back, which meant the case was officially shelved in the Wolfe archives, filed under human folly. Later, when the house had digested the last traces of scandal, the doorbell rang. It was Saul. He came in without fuss and handed me an envelope. Inside was a single page, typed, unsigned. You are thorough, I concede. J.S. I showed it to Wolfe. He studied it a moment, then let it flutter onto the desk like a petal falling. A concession, he said. Useless. Phooey. Miss Stone will find other clients. She has learned that paper burns as easily as cloth. Think she'll try us again? I asked. No, Wolfe said. Not here. The brownstone is not hospitable to trespass. I grinned. Unless it's Fritz rearranging ladles. That earned me a glare, which was worth it. By evening, the house had resumed its rhythm. Orchids upstairs, dinner preparations below, and Wolfe in his chair. I looked around the office and couldn't resist one last thought. Funny thing about curtains, I said. They're supposed to cover windows, keep drafts out, but half the time they hide more trouble than they stop. Wolfe opened his eyes just enough to pin me. Curtains, he said, are meant to frame, not to conceal. When misused, they suffocate. He lifted his glass again. That is humanity's flaw, Archie. We insist on drapery when a bare window would do. We hide behind cloth and then wonder why the air is stale. He drained the beer. I closed my notebook. The case of the widow who hid behind the curtain was over, filed away, and the brownstone returned to its sacred quiet. Fritz called us to dinner, and I followed Wolfe to the dining room. He was heavier with victory than with food, but that was Wolfe's way. As for me, I made a mental note. Next time a widow shows up with secrets in a handbag, I'd check the curtains first. It saves time.